It is a choice what to do with the trauma, the anger, the frustration, the anxiety, the pain. It is a choice to say whether or not we will allow God to move through it. C.S. Lewis once wrote in his book, The Problem of Pain, "We can even ignore pleasure, but pain insists upon being attended to. We have to do something with it." God whispers to us in our pleasures. Says, "This is really nice. It's family time, Christmas morning. This is great." He speaks to us in our consciousness. But he shouts in our pain. It is his megaphone to rouse a deaf world. There's a lot that happens in the midst of this, but recognizing that God, in the midst of our pain, in the midst of our suffering, in the midst of our trauma, is calling out to us. And while he did not cause this pain, while he did not cause us to go through moments of trauma and struggle, he is a God who continues to make beautiful things out of the ashes and out of the broken things. He can take your scars and your pain, and he can begin to heal and mend. He comforts. So my question is this morning. What will you choose? If we choose to ignore it, to push it aside, to fight against it, it'll remain. But if we seek God and seek Jesus in this moment, we might find that we are comforted beyond measure. And how do we receive this comfort? There's actually a very simple verse that tells us all about this. James 4:8. Draw near to God, and he will draw near to you. Why is it that some of the most unhealthy parts of our life, depression, trauma, angst, hurt, cause us to do things that are actually counterintuitive for healing and health? When I'm depressed, you can go get medication from a doctor, yes, but often you just want to stay in bed in the darkness and continue to live in those spaces. You don't want to be brought into a better mood. You don't want to go do things that you love or see friends or exercise or do any of those things. Depression is a liar that wants to keep you stuck in it. Trauma is a liar sometimes because it wants to be in the forefront of everything there. When getting up and turning on the lights and cleaning your room and making your bed can be a simple step that'll make you begin to feel better, that'll pull you up a little higher in that depression. And seeing friends might brighten your mood, and beginning to work out and do things that are healthy for you will actually draw you towards health. And spiritually, we have the same response. Sometimes when we are hurt, devastatingly hurt, we pull away from God. We begin to put distance as if we don't think God cares about us. We don't trust him to deal with those things. We can't be happy in that space, and so we just say, I'm going to take a break. And before you know it, how long has it been? Weeks, months, years? Before you found yourself once again at the feet of God. Or you pull away from the body of Christ, this group of people that are here in this room, that are here to support and help you. And we want to hide all the shame and hide all the trauma, but it is those that draw near to God that find comfort. That was point one, so drawing near to God will help him draw near to you. This is how you receive comfort. Number two, and we learn this from Paul, his traumatic experience. We don't know what it is. We know that he is afraid of his life and wondering even if life was worth living in the province of Asia. He could see his life flashing before him, and that trauma was leading him. But like C.S. Lewis explained, God had a megaphone, and he learned not to depend on himself, but to depend more on God. And through that, he transformed the way he thought about his pain and suffering. He began to say, the comfort that I have received, I'm giving to you. So that you will see and understand what happens in suffering and what it means to rely on God, but also that you will be comforted in your suffering. Is it possible that God is going to and can use your trauma and your broken moments, your hurt heart, in order to help others through you? Think about it, it's logical. Who better to help someone who loses a little one than someone who has walked through that journey and who's carried that grief and has wrestled with God and who has drawn near to God and said, I know what it's like. Granted, there are moments that you're going to go through where you're going to say, my wife can't understand, my parents can't understand, no one can understand me, but there are people in this space right now that have gone through traumas similar to you, gone through hurt, and have come out the other side not bitter but better, more like Jesus, more trusting in Jesus, learning to be patient and learning the value of comfort of a God who draws near to them. There are those who have been through divorce, have watched their kids go off the rails and miss them and long for them. There are those who have experienced great grief and loss. And while I don't talk about it often, there are those in this room that have experienced abuse that makes us wonder about humanity. But who better to help minister to others that are in the midst of that storm than those who have been through it? Is it possible that God is going to use your traumatic moments finally, I really got down to the 3-point sermon this week, which feels very old school, but it is very helpful. Paul discovered that God is developing a patient, overcoming, confident faith in him when he had to let go of everything else and rely on God. Going through trauma and coming out better on the other side, making the choice to draw near to God, making the choice to use your pain to help others, making the choice to allow God to shape you. It creates a rock-solid faith. Knowing that God has me no matter what. Whether things get worse or better, God is still God and God is still near to me. It gives confidence that no matter what happens, I will get through it. When we talk about things like COVID, when we talk about things like trauma and abuse and loss, while they leave a lasting mark, there is an end to it. There is an end to certain amounts of grief. We step into a new phase where we are beginning to see light and hope and restoration. I've been thinking a lot about what it means for us to be a people that overcome trauma, that value what happens to us even in the midst of our woundedness. And here are a few things that I came to. In a secular army and in a secular way, if you are injured, guess what happens to you? You get set aside. You get put on the back burners. You get told to go home. In the kingdom, it is often those that are wounded that get a front row seat to what God is doing in the kingdom. That those who have been through the most have the most to offer and the most ability to minister. And so often when I look at the concepts of trauma and the things that we're going to be talking about, one of the things that really defines whether we grow in health, we become better for it, or we get worse, is our recognition that that trauma doesn't define us, that that hurt doesn't belong to us, that that hurt, while present, will eventually lead to us to a place where we can be stronger for others. I spent a significant amount of time last week with Miss Elsie Smith. How many of you guys know Elsie? Some of you guys don't know Elsie, so I'm going to just tell a bit of her story. Elsie sat on that back row right by the sound booth every single week when I got here. Faithfully. She would come in about 10 minutes late. She is now 94 years old, I believe. And she was holding on to going to church as much as she could all the time. But not many know her full story. See, she was a pastor's wife. But before that, when she was a young woman, she got married and they gave birth to their first child. And within 2 weeks of that baby being born, her husband passed away. And so, as a single mom in Muskogee, and we're talking like 50s and 60s, right? We're talking a long time ago, when it feels impossible, she didn't get bitter while she wrestled through her grief. You know what she did? She turned into the church and began to serve. She began to invest in youth ministry and spent her time caring for teenagers and her kid. Eventually, that would lead to her pastor telling her one thing that she never wanted to hear and one thing she would always regret. You would make a great pastor's wife. And to that she said, I don't want to do that. Well, when you tell God no, sometimes He makes a way. And it was 9 years later that she was introduced to a widowed pastor who had his kids and she had her kid, and they began this beautiful story where they went and did ministry together for years and raised those kids. And when they retired, he was faithful and brought her back to Muskogee so that she could begin to invest once again in this church. She just had back surgery, and she's getting ready to kind of go into an assisted living situation, but it's been a while since she's been able to attend regularly. What Elsie reminds me of is exactly what Paul goes through. She made a choice in how she was going to handle that personal trauma. Whether she was going to be bitter and angry, whether she was going to lean into God, whether she was going to seek comfort. Altar